Thanks for joining us for Disability Resources, Toolkits, and Consultants. Oh my! Today we are here to talk about resources. Our earlier panel kind of talked about access versus inclusion, and we really took a deeper dive into what the differences are between the two and how we can be more inclusive. So for this panel, we want to talk about what those resources actually are and also give you an opportunity to ask questions and work through some of the barriers that you experience and some of the resources that you're seeking. So I want to give you a prompt right now in the chat. If you could please just, get in there and introduce yourselves, give a little information about who you are, what you do. And then also think about the questions of what kind of barriers you see in your organization to creating access. So not specific barriers like a ramp like that I would experience, but what are your barriers to providing access? So I want you to think about that. And then later on, I'll go through an example of a park that has done some things well, and I'll give y'all the opportunity to ask more questions, and we'll address the questions that you came up with. So yeah, really any question though. Some of this might be a repeat, going to do some introductions for those of you that were at our earlier presentation. But my name is Ashley Schahfer. I'm the owner, founder of Empowering Access. I do disability, equity, inclusion consulting. We do it through lived experience. So I hire a bunch of people with different experiences in disability, and we assess all sorts of things from programs, sites to websites, everything. I almost forgot, my pronouns are she, her, and then I also wanted to hit on land acknowledgements. I've been doing some learning lately, and I'm from the Bend area, or that's where I live these days, which is Warm Springs territory. And right now I'm in Salt Lake, sorry, I have to get my notes again. It is the Deschutes and the Eastern Shoshone territories. That's something that took me, like 5 minutes to Google and find out. I also, through that research, did some more digging and found this conversation about kind of the performative aspect of land acknowledgements. And so I'd like to acknowledge that we all have learned that it's appropriate for us to find out where we are and to call that out. But I also want to challenge us to dig a little deeper, because unless we're actually doing some work around these and learning about these territories and tribes, then it kind of stops here. And so I'd like to challenge people to look into what land you're on, learn more about that tribe, what they faced, what they are facing, and take it a bit further and make sure that we think about this conversation. Later in the presentation, or you might have already gotten it, there's a resource link that is a Google Doc that has a bunch of resources. And at the bottom, there's a really great article that I really enjoyed about the performative aspect of land acknowledgements and how we kind of work through that. So please check that out. But from there, I wanted to go into introducing some of our speakers, who are the same speakers from last time, Cara and Sachiko. And I'm going to ask them to give a little brief description about who they are, what they do, give as much information as you would like. Also, feel free to give your needs for this space. And then also, I would love to hear about your most recent adventure and what made it accessible for you, because I know that you've both been on some pretty grand adventures lately. So I will let them carry us into a group conversation and get their intros going. Cara, you want to take it first?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here and to see the two of you here again. My name is Cara Frank. My name sign is this. It's because I love backpacking, so that's where my name sign comes from. Right now, I work for the Land Trust Conservation, the Deschutes Land Trust Conservation. I work for them as the outreach coordinator, and we work to conserve the land, and we work with the tribes in this area. I want to acknowledge them: the Wasco, the Warm Spring, and the Deschutes tribe. So we work with them consistently while we are working to preserve the land here, and we are looking to preserve these traditions in the Bend, Oregon area. I know it's also where Ashley's from. So I'm also on the Deaflympic ski team. I've been an instructor and coach there. So I don't know if you all know, but there's an international Deaflympics that happens every 4 years. And the Deaflympics is approved by the International Olympic Committee. So it is elite deaf athletes who compete every 4 years. I was in the last one that we held in 2019 in Italy. There were 34 countries represented there who all competed in a variety of different sports. We had a variety of different languages there because ASL is not universal. So that provides some interesting, wonderful experiences. It was a wonderful experience to be there. And our country brought home a lot of medals. We actually were in 5th place out of all the countries represented. I'm a little competitive, in case you haven't noticed, so that's why I know that. And I've had the honor of working with Ashley in her business as a consultant there, heading out into different spaces to provide outdoor accessibility consultation and assessment and feedback through the deaf lens. Oh, and I'll turn it over to Sko. And then I'll talk about my adventure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sachiko. I go by Sko. And this is my sign name. It's up here on my forehead because I kind of moved through the deaf and hearing world. I'm very good at that. That's where my name sign comes from. So I am the co-founder of an organization called CorpsTHAT. CorpsTHAT is a nonprofit with a goal of incorporating the deaf community into the outside world by providing outdoor education, recreation, and job development. Our nonprofit was founded 5 years ago. I do have another hat that I wear in an international organization. It's called Deaf Worlds, DDW, and I am a co-executive director for that organization. I've been involved in that for 3 years. So CorpsTHAT is focused on the US. It's available nationwide. DDW is an international group. And I'm involved with both of these organizations because I've realized that accessibility of resources is often not provided to the deaf community. Information is not accessible, and that is so important to provide. And I'm happy to be here and see you both again. We had this morning workshop, so I'm very excited for this afternoon panel and to continue this discussion. Oh, you want to talk about your adventure? Yeah, sure. Ashley had asked about our most recent adventure, so I gave that a little bit of thought. So I actually just came back 2 days ago from a trip that led me to a few national parks. And I did a tour that started out with a deaf mountain biking workshop in Moab, Utah. So that was the first thing that brought me to that area, was doing that mountain biking tour. That was a full weekend, a full access of using sign language. While we were on the trail, we had a lot of different opportunities to see different beautiful things in the area. There are about 25 of us. I learned quite a bit. And that was such a wonderful experience and a start to a really great week of travel. Having an accessible experience mountain biking was really something special. So after that, my husband and I, he's also deaf, we use sign language when we communicate. So the two of us continued our journey, and we popped around to different national parks in the southwest area, which right now is a little difficult with COVID. As you know, everyone has to wear masks, so the two of us thought maybe we would sign up for some tours But with the additional barrier of masks and not being able to communicate with people, we decided not to do that. We'll put those on hold and come back another time to those areas to try and experience that, because unfortunately with masks, they cover 2/3 of your face. It's really impossible to kind of understand someone, to sort of read their face or facial expressions or understand what's going on. And then trying to get interpreters, it would have been too many complicated layers for us to figure out on this trip, this vacation that we're trying to enjoy. So we did have a great time, but we did have to, kind of do everything on our own. So we read pamphlets, we read information that the park gave out about history, and, read all the brochures and the different informational booths that they have. I'm a bit of a geography nerd, so I love that kind of stuff. I love learning about that, and South Utah, and just has so much of that to offer.
Great, thanks for that. What a contrast. Sorry.
Yeah, it really was. It was odd to go from a fully accessible experience to something not. You just have to be flexible and go with it. Yep, that is the challenging part. So speaking of adventures, like I mentioned, I'm involved with an international organization that, with that, we travel quite a bit. So I was actually just got back from the Dominican Republic. I actually just got back yesterday. And I love traveling. A lot of times in other country, communication is a lot easier because people are used to gesturing. Sometimes people get thrown off when they find out that you're deaf. But you can go to different countries where they're, used to gestures, and something that's a wonderful experience that can be very accessible is scuba diving. So I've actually got a picture I'd like to show of me scuba diving at some point. It's in the slides, but I went scuba diving with a group of friends in Australia. We went to the Great Barrier Reef a bit back, and we went scuba diving there, and we were researching fish, researching different species on the reef. And I was with a friend who was deaf, and under the water we could communicate the whole time, while the people who were hearing and didn't know sign language couldn't. And that was a really wonderful thing to experience. Just, a little bit of an advantage that we have as deaf people, being able to do that. There were no barriers until we got out of the water and back on land, and having to communicate with people who don't know sign language, and experiences that aren't accessible. But that's a story of my life. I've always had to deal with that.
Wow, that's pretty powerful, that under the water, where it's not our natural habitat, was more accessible for you than above. Oh, my goodness. I hope that sinks in for people. That's a big one. Thank you for sharing that. It's cool to hear your stories. It's been quite the experience working on these presentations with the three of us, and we're all traveling right now. I'm about to go to Moab and do some adventuring on my own. I came out here and I was planning to do paragliding with Project Airtime in Salt Lake, but I got here and it's kind of been pouring down rain. So I don't know that I'm going to do that, but I'm going to go adventure with my car and do some camping. So yeah, I see in the chat that some people have said hi. Hey, Pat from OAS and Helena from State Parks. Glad that you're all here. And I really want to encourage people to just start flooding in with questions. Anything you can think of. If there's some barriers that you and your organization are experiencing, or some examples that you kind of want to go through, that you need help with, that you would envision yourself needing a consultant for, or you feel like there's a resource that you wish you had, please just throw it out there. I would, even though we can't see you and you can't talk to us, I would love to be able to have as much of a discussion as possible. So please just go ahead and throw in there. And in the meantime, I will go to the next slide, then go through the example of something that has worked out well. So this example is Milo MacGyver State Park. There were some people like Helena who was a participant in this, being that it was one of state parks, and also Adventures Without Limits was involved, and Oregon Spinal Cord Injury Connection. Everyone got together. This is like before COVID. I feel like it's like 3 years ago now. I don't know. It's been such a time warp. But they did a lot of work, Adventures Without Limits and OSCI and state parks, to come together and host a accessible camping adventure. It's something that a lot of people in wheelchairs with physical disabilities don't often get to experience, is camping, because not a lot of sites are specifically set out for them. It's hard to find information on ones that are. They don't know who to contact. People aren't readily available to like directly be like, hey, I need this, and get a response. And so they kind of, worked on experimenting on what it would look like for an organization to work with another group and make things accessible. And it was a total success. It was amazing. It's how I met Helena, and I've done a lot of work, and all of us have kind of come together and like really created community around this. But I wanted to bring up this example because as you can see on the slide, there's no ADA group sites at the park. The cost of a bathroom, platforms, tent, parking lot, all of that is over $150,000 to do any ADA upgrades, which I'm sure a lot of you have experienced. They're extremely expensive to do any ADA upgrades, and that becomes a barrier for everyone. And so that's one of the barriers that I'm talking about for y'all. But what ended up happening with this is that we were able to come together, and state parks and Helena really listened, and we told them what some of the barriers were, like the benches, park benches, or not the benches, but the why am I'm blanking on it. Where does it say in there? The picnic tables, those things. But the seats for picnic tables, like sometimes the table extends and there's like one space for a wheelchair at the end. And like, that's cool if it's just one person in a wheelchair. But what we were doing was getting a bunch of people in wheelchairs together. And so we wanted to be able to sit at a table together. And so what they did, which was super easy, is they just removed the seats on one side. And so, all it was is unscrewing something. It didn't take a whole lot of extra work to modify it and make it accessible. But that allowed us all to sit together and have a meal together. Some other things that they were considering was like moving partitions in the bathroom, because the stalls were too small. And really, if we just took out one of the partitions, it would be more accessible. We modifying the field. So we ended up using not the designated space for camping, but using a field that they had that was nearby a bathroom and had good trail access. And they ended up allowing us to drive on there and set up our tents and have access. And really all of that took was having the conversation and, them telling us their needs for the space and to maintain the property, and telling them what our needs are. They also installed a power kind of outlet so that people could charge their chairs or any kind of medical device they had, which was super helpful. That often can be a barrier because, to camping, if someone has a CPAP or they have an electric wheelchair, then, those things need to be charged. That goes for like hearing devices, cochlear implants. There's all sorts of things that need to be charged for mobility. And so providing that was huge, and that wasn't a huge cost. And then, DCG on trails. I forget what that stands for. But the cost altogether was $2,500. So I wanted to point out like how little of a cost it is when we just listen to people, when we don't focus on ADA solely. ADA, of course, is very important. We need accessible bathrooms. We need to have paved areas. But we need to go beyond ADA, and we really need to start expanding what that looks like in our minds to create access. I think part of that is understanding what disability really looks like. And so we'll go into later some of the resources, like the toolkit that I put together with Willamette Partnership. We talk about an equity lens, and that's really kind of what this is talking about, is really starting to understand a little more some context of what disability is and the needs of people, so that we can start to focus on different parts of our sites, like maintenance, changing out gravel to decompose granite. There's all sorts of things that we can make, like incremental changes that will make things just accessible. There's so many more than, if we strictly follow ADA and only do that. So I'm hoping this example kind of spurs some questions in here. I'm looking at the chat. There was some question about dogs and decomposed granite. I'm not sure what that question. Oh no, duh. Sorry. My brain is a little foggy today. I saw dog. Can you tell that I love dogs? It says DCG and decomposed granite. That's great. Thank you for that. But I think we'll go back to the 4 panel and ask some questions there while y'all think of some more questions. I do see someone asked if that was a permanent change to Milo MacGyver, and I don't think it was necessarily permanent. I don't believe that the field is designated as a campsite now. I think maybe some of the changes to the bathroom and the power station stay there, and some of the things that they came up with have become permanent resources for them and knowing how to handle things when they do arise. Jennifer responded that they put them back after the event. However, they have since designed a balanced picnic table with a bench on only one side. Cool. So until y'all come up with more questions, I'm going to be asking questions of this panel here. So I'm curious, because all of us, are pretty big outdoor enthusiasts, and we also work in the outdoor industry. I'm curious what barriers you've seen organizations experience, maybe specifically within your own group, but, and just kind of resources you wish existed.
And I think almost every time I've started to, join a new work group and started a new place, often we've got to get, the transparency set up before we join, that, hey, I'm deaf and I would like to see, part of my identity within your community, and, hoping that they'll welcome that. And that's always great. Often, when you join a new organization, it's kind of, you have to start from a blank canvas. So there's no captioning yet on their website or in their films or videos, or there's not signing on any of their YouTube. So just starting with that as a starting point and building that foundation little by little and expanding on it, it's not something that happens overnight, but you do need to have those conversations about it and recognize that we do have things that are barriers, and setting up a plan of action for how to accomplish that and get those things done and have deadlines set for accountability. So more often than not, I've seen this type of these tasks where they start to become like low priority at the bottom of the list, and they don't understand that, hey, this is my life. It's top on my priority list, and I need to see myself within the organization. And so captioning access on websites and the programming itself and how inclusive those programs are. Our ASL interpreters provided are their visual aids. If there's things at nighttime, for example, like stargazing classes or something like that in the dark, that's, in the dark, being in the dark is a barrier that we need to be able to see and catch, whatever communication is happening. Other tools that can be provided during that, for example, lights that don't, point up to the sky, but that point down at the ground. So to avoid the light pollution, to see signing, or even writing back and forth, texting back and forth. So there are a lot of different approaches to communication with that, but just small incremental changes and tools. So for me personally, one of the biggest challenges is that my disability often is not seen as a disability. it's people don't think of me as having a disability because I don't match their vision of what disability looks like. So when I provide feedback for them, it's a little bit harder to get verification from others, so, or validation. So, and it's the work culture too. Everyone's on board. Everybody's got to be on board. Everyone needs to be educated and learning and about everyone's lived experience and and knowing everyone's story. No one story is the same. And Sachiko, I was going to add to what Cara mentioned about communication. Yeah, it's basically working personally, whether it's a work relationship or a personal relationship, relation 101, communication is key. Communication is crucial. So, when you're establishing an organization, when we established CorpsTHAT, we recognized that the deaf individuals who work in the outdoor industry, we collected their stories, and we noticed that there was a common theme that was appearing in those stories, that it was often made the deaf person's responsibility to communicate more so than the hearing person's. So when a deaf person goes in for work at any company, organization, or agency, they're like, "Oh, it's great. We have a deaf person on our team. We're so inclusive. And so would you mind teaching ASL to our employees?" And that's great. It's a nice chance to include them and learn our communication, and I get that. But now the deaf person is the one who comes into work. They've got a job description, and teaching ASL to their other employees is not included in that job description. So this is an additional responsibility that they're piling onto their everyday duties. Like, I don't have a curriculum for this. I don't have tools for this. So I've got to teach my peers and my boss now, and they're all trying to figure that out, but that's not part of their job. So why would you ask them to do more than the rest of the people at the company to make themselves included? So, maybe having a deaf instructor come, or having a class like 1 hour every Friday. Having people get together, and we realized that at CorpsTHAT, we recognize those common things coming up. So we started a new program where we are teaching ASL plus outdoor vocabulary and signs. And that way, when we teach them, we don't have to pile that onto the deaf person as their responsibility. So we provide that as part of our programming. And the goal of it is to introduce people and know that communication can happen, that there's less piling on of those responsibilities for the deaf individual that's working. That's a lot of what we see with the communication piece of that.
Nice. Yeah, I think that, that really hits on hiring consultants. Sco, I think you've built that into your group and what you've built, that you provide that now. But I think a lot of times it tends to fall on, the person with a disability or who's deaf, to provide the services or to teach someone how to be more accessible, because they're there, and that turns into tokenism, when we're asking that of someone because they're the one that's different from us, and we really want to avoid that. If you have someone working for you, they should not be the ones expected to know all the answers. And so that's what we wanted to talk about, hiring consultants, hiring people that have already put themselves in that position and are ready to carry that emotional labor, because it's a lot of work. And because it's something we experience all day, every day. And so having to also kind of carry the burden of teaching someone is a lot. And so yeah, honoring that and hiring people and recognizing that the lived experience is really important. That, oftentimes we're going to get it wrong if we don't, ask someone who's lived it before. And so that's why MacGyver was so great, is that they invited people to come in and to be heard, and they really listened, and that was amazing. And then I think that gets at some of the questions we have in here. Someone is asking if the main issue we encountered at MacGyver, if that was all, or if there's other things that could be offered and added. I mean, in general, I think I've talked a lot with Helena and they've worked on this. I think COVID really set a lot of things back, but we talked about it in our other panel of having, resources on their website doing the 360 view, letting people know the things that are accessible or that they're willing to adapt things and make them accessible. I think that would be a great thing for state parks, is to just create that kind of communication with the disabled community so that they know what's out there and how to find it and who to talk to about it. I know that they're aware of doing that and would love to do it. It's just, we're all in that situation of money and resources right now. And so that's like a big picture thing. I think a lot of times we talk about the decomposed granite DCG. And that's one of those smaller things that I think could be added everywhere. And I'm constantly saying this, like, get rid of gravel and do something very fine and hard packed like DCG, and that's one thing that I think could be changed. And just kind of our policies within maintenance, even just making sure that we're aware of where roots start to pop up or things start to degrade and becomes a more of a transition, at least for physical disabilities with a wheelchair. Sometimes when things degrade, then that creates basically a step for me. And so that's something simple within our regular maintenance. If we have an eye for it, then we can notice it and we can address it as it pops up instead of waiting for it to get really bad and someone to be like, oh, this is hard. That's one of those things. And then, I like this question. Someone's interested in wheelchair accessible hot springs, soaking and creating a rustic rock soaking area that the chair can enter the water. I am also very interested in that. I love hot springs and soaking, and I'm very disappointed in Bend for not having hot springs. They're too far away. But I would love to work on a project like that if anyone is interested. I can't tell from here who posted the question. But yeah, I think there's definitely ways of doing it. I know that Crystal Crane Hot Springs has kind of come up with a way to make things more accessible. So I think they're a good example to look at. I know at Bend Parks and Rec, they've worked on some things. I think like our Whitewater Park has a ramp that goes in, and I know they're working on some other access points for water that I spoke with. Pat and I from OAS spoke with them and did some design charrette thing to kind of work through what it could look like to like seamlessly make access, because a lot of times we see things for water access that they become kind of more medical or like dock looking. And, we don't always want that. Like, we're putting a lot of money into making these beautiful spaces also work with the environment. And so we should also be doing that with our accessible features. And it's definitely possible. But I think it takes going through that process of what they did with Milo MacGyver is speaking with people with disabilities, getting their feedback, also getting feedback from consultants, people that have lived experience, but also the educational knowledge to really inform designs and things, but really driving home the with, not for. Do the two of you have any kind of additions to some of those questions, or want to jump on any of the questions you might see in the chat?
Yes. So, yeah, I saw one of the questions talking about exceptional jobs in making access to events. And I really I wanted to recognize one place that's in Yosemite National Park. They host an event every year that's a deaf gathering, where there are, ranchers and people who sign, rangers and people who sign, and they're there. I think it's almost a full week. They schedule this event. You might be able to join for just the weekend only if you want, but it's nice because, to be able to go alone and, become the only person who's reliant on the ASL interpreter. But when there's a full group of us, for a gathering of us, and we're all benefiting from it, and it's a completely signing environment, it becomes even more equitable because the language is something that everyone there is using, and everyone there gets educated, and it's impossible to overlook. So you have to worry about the lag between the interpreter interpreter and what's being said. Sometimes there's a time lag, and typically the group sites are taken over because visibility. So with that campground, we've got to go to maybe and have some visual barriers when you get there, like fences or like things that are too high, and you've got to look at the person around the visual barriers. So things like that. It's a completely open environment where you can see there's like a circle, and it's just very inclusive for us when we're in a bigger group like that for the deaf community. And for example, like how they set up some of the audience for some of the presentations. Typically traditionally people are in rows, and I'm so sick of sitting in rows because it doesn't matter where I sit. If I sit in the front, then I can see the presenter. But if someone makes a comment from the back, and by the time I turn my head to figure out who's talking, it's impossible. I can't see them. So they've really thought through all of those barriers. So not and including like the audience and setting up the audience, but actually setting up a circle, like a U-shaped semicircle, to give presentations where everyone can see everyone without having to crane their neck to look around and get whiplash or damage their neck. So yeah, really, they wanted to recognize Yosemite as an exceptional one, and I really haven't had many opportunities to look for more. But just recently out west, the Olympics came up, and they had a video, the National Olympic National Park, and they had a video explaining how to join and sign up to get an interpreter, how to get someone to come in and sign instead of having to read all of the interpretive materials. So, as a sign language user, many of them are not the English is not their first language, and it's a lot of heavy reading in English to go through a lot of the signage and interpretive materials. So when you've got a video, a signed video ready for them, or a signer ready for them, that was really interesting. Says it was a hearing signer. We do recognize that there's a hearing accent in their signing. So I was really wondering if they were using deaf sign language and more ASL grammar instead of relying on signed English. But I do applaud their effort in creating these materials. It was a well-intentioned step in the right direction.
So I wanted to add on to what Cara said. I had a similar experience in Yosemite. It was a very, very cool gathering for about a week. And I would like to recognize that their trails did seem a bit wider. And I noticed that, a lot of people who are watching right now are probably involved in architecture and land design. So I would like to say that, whatever you're envisioning, if you're looking for something for wheelchair users, is something we want to make things accessible for physical accessibility, but really is also a benefit for deaf users, because when we're on the trail and we're trying to talk to each other, the trail is small. It's really hard to stand next to each other and keep a conversation, and then usually we have to get in a line and no one can communicate. If a trail is a bit wider, then people can stand next to each other and have conversations. So it not only benefits wheelchair users, but it benefits the deaf community as well. Okay, and I'd also like to add to that sometimes even with adding some railings are great, because if people are walking downstairs and having a conversation in sign language, having the rail to hold on to, I look at someone, I know I'm not going to fall down then.
That's great. Thank you for that. I think that kind of feeds into another question here for small organizations, what they can do to improve their accessibility of their website and other materials. I think one of the greatest resources is finding other examples, other precedents. National Parks has done a good amount of work, obviously, with Yosemite being pretty accessible, but looking into other spaces and other organizations and what they've done and who they've kind of worked with, I think can be a huge resource. There's also, if we can go to our next slide, which is pretty much just the initial slide, kind of showing some of the other resources that are out there. These are some of the things that I pulled up that exist. So you should have gotten in the chat and probably somewhere else a link to the resources page that I put together. And it has all of these different, snapshots in there of resources. The accessibility toolkit for land managers is the one I worked on. There's also a webinar that Oregon Trails Coalition did, which I was a part of, for inclusive information and design principles. Specifically for website stuff, that's a conversation that I've had quite a bit with people. And I've also dealt with it on my own website, being, a small business that's, pretty new. It kind of all fell on me to create that. I couldn't hire someone to do a big fancy thing. And so I had to kind of stumble through it on my own. And so my experience with it is that I ended up, turning on the screen reader on my Mac, which comes built in. There's also apps for it, which, can be misused, because I want to acknowledge that myself using a screen reader I'm going to fumble no matter what, because I don't know how to use the system very well. And so it can make it seem worse than it is. But at the same time, if you turn on your screen reader and you go to a website, the way that it reads everything is really interesting, because it takes the very first object, whatever that is, whether that's a line, just a designed element, it will say something about it. And so every little thing on your website catches that and says something to the person. And so that becomes really overwhelming. And sometimes getting to the actual content that the person wants, is like a really big trek to get there. And just not fun. If you hear that voice, it's overwhelming. And so what I resulted in doing for that was that I created my very first link on there was a read-only website, because I tried so hard to go through and make my website more accessible, but the platform I was using just wasn't built in enough. And so I have a link that's to read only, and it goes to that page, and it is just text. It gives them everything they want and is easy to understand. And so I kind of translated my whole website into a very blank thing, so that there's both there. It feels like sort of a compromise, and I don't know that it's enough. That's, still something I'm obviously working on myself. If we want to go back to the panelists and see if they have any experience in that, and ways that we can make our websites more accessible, give some feedback on that. Anyone have anything to say on it? You don't have to.
Let's go. Well, similar to what Ashley just said, I also had to set my own website and make sure it was inclusive and accessible, and it's not easy to figure out. So I tried to add materials that were in sign language. I made sure to add captions to everything. I did turn off sound for all my videos, and I did that on purpose, because I figured that way it encourages hearing people to look at the captions. They're not relying on the audio anymore, and they sort of have the same experience that we have. And it's just baby steps, little things that can affect big change. I'm trying to think of what else I added to my website. I try to add contrasting color for people who have visual impairments, and make sure that things are clear. And in developing a website, I did it from scratch, and I'm not an expert at developing websites, but it was something I learned along the way. And it is expensive to hire someone to come in and develop one for you. And as a small organization, I get it. I had to deal with the same thing. Something that helped me a lot was having loyal supporters to my organization, people who believed in our mission, who supported us, and who could provide help, people who were willing to interpret our videos, people who were willing to provide help on making the website more accessible. That was really wonderful. People, just your loyal people who believe in your message and support that. So they can help out as well. Cara, do you have anything you want to add? Personally, I have no experience with designing a website, so I can only comment from my perspective of looking at websites. But anyone who wants to sort of get a taste of what it is like to be deaf, I encourage you to go to a deaf services organization and look at their website. You will see that there's a lot of resources on there and adaptive things on there. There's one company called Combo. If you look on their website, there's so many visuals, so many videos, so many videos in sign language. They also have captions if they're in sign language, so many videos with just captions, and from people from all over the country. And they do have the color contrasting. It's very visually friendly and easy to look at. So maybe check out Convo, Convo. Check out their website for a good example of something that is accessible and friendly for deaf eyes. A lot of people think, I'm going to have to type out all these captions for myself on this video if I want to add them. But there are companies out there that you can pay that they will caption your videos for you. You can also find volunteers to caption them, but it's probably good to have someone who has more experience in that. But I have seen captions that just caption the speaking content, but it's also important that you want to include music in there, any noise happening in the background. Unfortunately, growing up as a kid, I'd watch scary movies and they wouldn't capture the scariest parts, which were footsteps coming or doors creaking. So as a deaf kid, I wasn't getting scared by these movies because they weren't included in the captions. All the audio information was not given. So we need to train people on how to be more inclusive in their captioning as well, and that's important to consider. There's a company that I use, and they're called Caption This. They're a company I could recommend. They're a mix of deaf and hearing people who will sign videos and then caption them for audiences. So that's a good company that I could recommend.
Nice. And I think also with adding captioning, we also want to think about people who might not be able to see as well. Just in the ways that we talk in our videos, describing what we're doing while we're doing it. Doesn't have to be a thing where we like stop and we're like, oh, for those who can't see, this is what, the thing is. But seamlessly kind of as we talk, like I'm going on this trail with all these beautiful trees and things, and just making it a part of our conversation and making sure to include that in the video so that people can, get an idea of what they're experiencing. Along the lines of website, I think in our earlier panel, we talked about adding an accessibility tab to your website and just making the information about access really available and visible, and a resource to kind of reach out to a direct person that you can contact. So often we just get in these chains of like, contact this person, contact that person, this person, and it becomes overwhelming and we kind of give up. And so just making the information really direct and being very transparent about what you have and your abilities and your willingness. If you're willing to accommodate, even if you don't know how you're going to accommodate, that information is important because it communicates to us a commitment to working on it. And that makes us feel included and like we want to access it. And so really just putting it on there and getting started. I think another question in here is about lived experience in the outdoor community and the hiring process, creating panels and stuff. I'm sure y'all might have something to say about that. It definitely, committees and panels happen a lot. And what I will say is pay people, and then I will let the two of you address it because I know you experienced it a lot. Who would like to go first?
Let's go. Yeah, so same, just to echo Ashley, pay people for their time. Stop taking advantage of people. Respect the work that they're doing. They are experts. They have the understanding. They have the lived experience. As compared to able people who haven't lived this experience. They don't have that. I'm involved on a few different boards, mostly boards, and I think it's really important to get a neutral outside person, but there are pros and cons to that. It is great to have them. And it's nice for people to let people be prepared before an interview, sort of give them information so they feel more prepared before they come in. And again, to emphasize, just we want to pay people for their time. I know it's a sensitive topic talking about money, but it's really important to bring in an expert and pay them for their time. People It doesn't matter if they're disabled, if they're deaf, it doesn't matter. If you're bringing someone in, learn from that process. And, it can be a tough learning process, so go on with that understanding. I think all of us have had, this experience. We all have been tokenized before. And, for so many years, I've been providing free advice and counsel and guidance. And, this is my free time that people are asking of me. And I already have to code switch, in the workplace, in this work environment, because it is an environment that prioritizes speaking. So I'm already code switching when I'm at work and when I'm in that environment. And then now in my personal time, do I want to have to keep code switching? That shouldn't be necessary. My personal time is for me. I've got, 1 foot in the deaf world and 1 foot in the hearing world, and I have to traverse between them. I can be more social in the deaf world, but in the hearing world, that's really, where the work is, where my work primarily is. So it's a fine line as I go in between them. And I think it's important to have diversity within your panel. You need to get those different perspectives. And you want to make sure that other people on the panel also understand where everyone else is coming from. Because I've experienced in the past, maybe making a comment and then feeling like I have to explain why maybe I asked something or said something, and I have to defend my reasoning because the people on my panel weren't getting it. They weren't understanding why I was asking this specific question. And it's because I'm coming through it with my deaf lens, and maybe they're coming through it with a hearing lens, so they're not understanding it. So it's important to recognize who's on your panel and who educate everyone so everyone's on the same page. And I would say hire someone who can be who can add diversity and be part of your team.
Definitely. I think the only thing I would add to that, pretty much what Cara is saying though, but just being very intentional about who you're bringing on to those panels. I think there's definitely a lot of validity to doing that, but be very intentional and don't just, don't just bring any old disabled person off the street. You want people that have experience in the outdoors or whatever it is you're asking them to kind of talk about, whatever that position might be that they're, looking at for hiring someone. And so, I think a lot of things around disability, just being very intentional and asking the right people and not tokenizing people, asking people that are already putting themselves out there to, that are willing to do the work. I think that's really important. Well, I think we're at our time, actually. Wow, I just looked up and suddenly it was that time. I was going to say another question, but we're out of time. And to address Riley Ranch, yes, it's pretty darn accessible. I wish I could get down in there, but I think it's been designed pretty well. So definitely check that out if you're curious about something that has been thoughtfully done. But otherwise, I think just want to say thank you so much for joining this, and please go to that Google Doc. And if it's not working for some reason, please feel free to reach out to me, and feel free to reach out if you have questions about empowering access. I'm sure if you have questions of the other panelists, you could also reach out. I don't want to speak for them, but I think, we'll shoot you down if it's too much. But thank you so much for being here. We really enjoyed talking about this, and we hope we get to, work with people in the future on some of this stuff. Is there anything anyone else would like to add?
I just want to say thank you to the both of you for having me here. Thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully everyone got some good takeaways from this, and we can all continue to work together.
Have a good day.
Thank you.